There we go, finally. Can't hear you. Oh, your audio's got to come on. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hi, everybody. Okay.
Hello?
Yeah.
There we are.
All right, here we go. Finally. Okay. I'm putting you on here, okay?
All right. Are we live?
Yeah, we're live. 2 people. I think other people thought that we're gone for good or something. Unfortunately, we had like 16 people at one point. So that's, I guess, not that great. Your head's really big in the video.
Oh.
Your head's really big in the video. Why is there echo?
I got it. I turned it off.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. Sorry. Better late than never, I guess.
Yeah, I'm sorry. You know what? Well, I got comfortable. I was like, oh, maybe we'll just, I'll go to my office and what happened here? There we go. I'll go to my office and we'll just use the Wi-Fi there. It's quiet, it's holy. It's Bright Week. Things will go well. Nope. Our upload speed here at the church is really low, and so in the church here we put a booster, which is for the router, and I have a hardwire line going into my MacBook right now, and that causes a nice stable stream, and that's why we can do these shows. But I have to sit here on the Solea. So I wanted to be in my office a little more comfortable, and not have to come and open up the church and everything like that tonight. But that's okay. I ran in here and plugged it all in. So
a good plan, but unfortunately.
Yeah, and for some reason, your our FaceTime wasn't working either, which is strange.
FaceTime wasn't working. Google Hangouts wasn't working. But thank goodness for Zoom.
Yeah, Zoom works well.
So we're back up to 9 people. Yay! You found us.
Okay, so I don't know if everybody heard the answers to.
No, I thought it was just me because we were having connection issues, but we could not hear the answers. So maybe you want to cover this again.
So Christ is risen again, everybody. Christos anesti. Yeah, sorry again. So we'll just start it again now, and that's fine. I apologize. So we'll stay on a little longer than usual, unless we have no other questions. Because I have 3 questions from the same person in our Gmail account that I'm gonna go through right now. But if anybody else has questions, please type them in now, because our show only goes as long as you guys ask questions. After that, we stop. That's the whole point of the live. So, okay. So the first question was, it says, Father, who was Jesus' favorite disciple? I've heard it referenced a few times in my readings these past few weeks, but it never actually specifies who it is, unless it does and I'm missing it. So, okay, so what I think you're referencing to, I could be wrong, is when we read a lot of the Gospel of John during Holy Week, and John, the theologian, who is the evangelist who wrote the Gospel of John, he is the beloved disciple of Christ. He doesn't refer to his own name out of humility in the book, but he often refers to himself. He's saying, the disciple whom Jesus loved. Like, for example, when Peter and him ran to the tomb when Mary Magdalene came and told him that Jesus had resurrected, it says that Peter and the other disciple whom Jesus loved got up and ran to the tomb, and the disciple ran faster than Peter and got to the tomb first, but he didn't go in, and things like that. So you always have this reference of the disciple whom Jesus loved, and that's John. That's John himself. We don't know why he says that. It doesn't use the word favorite. I don't know. I don't remember that word ever being used. It's usually his beloved, or the one Jesus loved. It could be that he had a special relationship with him, maybe because he was the youngest. He was the youngest at that time. He was probably like in his late teens, early 20s when he was following Christ. So I'm not sure why it's necessarily that he is the beloved. Of course, Christ loved all his disciples. But this is the person that is being referred to, right? So not the favorite, but the beloved. And so that's the answer to that question. The second question is a kind of a practical one. It says here, from previous years, I remember being told that when you get a red egg given to you from church, you are meant to keep it for a year. Is this true? I was raised Antiochian and married a Greek Orthodox, so never heard this before. what are we meant to do with it after the year? So this is kind of like not really a thing. It's not like an official, teaching or even tradition of the church. I've seen it for some people, like I've never done it before in my life, and but there is like some Greeks in some places in Greece where they'll like the egg that they get, they won't crack it, but they'll go put it on like their.
We used to keep it.
You keep, yeah. So we never kept it, but my mother-in-law does. It's more of like a cultural thing, so it's not really. There's no like real theological reason why we would keep it. And what do you do with it at the end? Well, there's no exact protocol for it. I guess you would throw it into nature somewhere, like we dispose of other things that are blessed, but because it'd be bad, right? You wouldn't eat it, and you wouldn't want to throw it in the garbage. So I don't know. What do you do with it, Tina, at the end of the year?
Well, so actually just that. So I learned from you a couple of years ago because we talked about things that we have in our house that are blessed, like crosses, or even like Harris will do crafts at Sunday school. Like, what do we do with this? And you said to me that those things should be put into nature or burned, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's correct.
That's what we did. We would throw it into nature.
Yeah. But as far as why we keep it, I have no clue. Like it could be just people see it as a blessing or a keepsake from the last year, just like some people like to keep the light from the resurrection service burning as long as possible in their candili and their oil lamp. Some people don't.
And statue flowers, we always keep those for at least a year.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. And also, like her last question of this person that sent me was just a follow-up. It says, I have the same question for the flowers we usually receive from the epitafio. What's the right way to keep or store them, right? So it's the same thing. Like some people, like anytime you get something from the church, whether it's like flowers from the epitafio, basil, from the elevation of the Holy Cross, some people usually put it at their iconostas or their prayer corner, iconisma, and they usually dry up. And then at the end of the year or until the next feast, like the next cycle, they either burn them or they throw them out in like the garden or somewhere in nature, but not in the garbage, right? So that's usually what they do. And I guess that's what you would do with the egg as well. But again, it's not standard with the egg. Because a lot of people also, what are you supposed to do with the egg? You're supposed to crack it, right? The tradition is you crack, you say Christus Anesti. The cracking represents the breaking of the stone in front of the tomb, and then you eat it, right? So, yeah, that's.
So, and on that note, I had a discussion after our photo. We talked about the meaning of the red egg and the cracking, and I was talking about it with somebody, and they said, well, the eggs are pagan. And frankly, I don't know enough about that. And I said, well, it's a Greek Orthodox traditional thing. And they said, no, it's pagan. They got it and they adapted it. Is that true? What do you say to that?
Yeah, so as far as is it pagan? No. There's a lot of things that, like, for example, like using an egg as opposed to something else. Somebody had asked that a few sessions ago about the red egg. I spoke about Mary Magdalene and the miracle that she did in front of the emperor with the egg, where she held up the white egg and it turned red miraculously in front of the emperor so that he could believe in the resurrection of Christ, the passion, the resurrection. So it's not pagan completely. Now, how does that square with other stuff we see in society, like, bunnies and that kind of thing, and that kind of stuff? Yeah, that might be like a mixture of, like, the secular side kind of like running parallel with the religious side, but that doesn't mean that every tradition that we have has a pagan root. There are a lot of it was really popular in the last, maybe I would say 20, 30 years. A lot of books came out, about this kind of topic, about how, everything that the Christians do is pagan, like the Christmas tree is pagan and this and that is pagan, and it was all just pagan stuff, and the Christians basically just adopted it all and Christianized it, and that's how we did it. So there's a lot of books about that, but and it was really popular and trendy, especially like in the late 90s, early 2000s. But there's been more research now showing that it's not so simplified. It's not. There was a bunch of pagan holidays, right? So I'll give you an example. And Father Andrew Stephen Damick writes, who wrote Orthodoxy and Heterodoxy, and also he writes a really good blog, on ancient faith blogs. He speaks about this, and he says, well, there are a lot of traditions that run parallel with paganism, but they're not necessarily coming from paganism. So, for example, everybody said the Christmas tree is pagan, right? It's a solstice tree, comes from Germany and this and that, and it has other, but then like we have actual historical evidence that evergreen trees were actually used in Byzantium, you know, and they were actually used even inside like great cathedrals and churches as decorations. Like they were like, it stretches further back than we ever thought, and that the use was being, you know, the use was Christian from very, very early on. So there's also, for example, like you say, oh, you know, December 25th was, you know, the solis day was the day of the sun god, which, you know, St. Constantine worshipped before he became a Christian. And then he just basically overlapped, you know, Christ's birth on December 25th and, you know, Christianized the pagan feast. Again, that was a very popular belief. However, again, liturgical research has shown that it's not necessarily that the Solus Day feast was around the same time in the winter as December 25th, Christmas, but rather Christmas, the reason why December 25th is chosen is because it is exactly 9 months to the day from March 25th, right? And what's March 25th? March 25th is the Evangelismo. It is the conception, right? So it's like, it's the perfect, cycle from conception to birth, 9 months, right? So this is the reason why it's December 25th, right? The Virgin Mary, we would celebrate her conception and the Annunciation on March 25th, and then 9 months later, we have the birth, right? So this is the reason why we have that, and this is what's cited. So there's a lot of people from the outside who are kind of making these speculations because they want to basically discredit or demythologize, I guess you could say, Christianity, but the history of the liturgical practices are much more complex. Yeah.
Gotcha. I have a couple of questions in the chat.
Yep.
So I'll go ahead and pose those to you rather.
Yep.
So Sophia says, where did the services that we have during Lent and Holy Week come from or develop from?
That's a huge question, Sophia. And I can't go into like a whole lecture about the liturgical evolution of it. I'll give you a really quick kind of like bird's eye view of it. So, because it's a lot, right? It's like 2,000 years, right? So obviously the way we do Holy Week right now is not the way that Christians did Holy Week or even have Holy Week like 1,500 years ago or 1,000 years ago even, right? It evolved, right? Because like church service evolved, right? So if you look at if you read any church history book or watch any video online, you'll see, like, for example, first 300 years, Christianity was illegal, right? So it was, the Church of the Martyrs, before St. Constantine the Great, Christians met in secret, right? They met in house. They didn't have big churches like we have now. They weren't even allowed to have property to buy or to have like a Christian property and build any type of temple. So what were they doing? They were like meeting in what were known as house churches, which were people's homes that they were offering as a place for kind of local small communities to meet in secret and private, and they would do the Eucharist there. So the liturgy was very basic. It was very simple. Sorry, it was essentially a meal with the Eucharistic prayer and the consecration of the bread and wine, just like the mystical supper was. And you didn't have this pomp and circumstance and processions and things like that. Those things come much later. So obviously they didn't have Lent as we have it today. They didn't have Holy Week as we have it today. They didn't have all this. So it evolves over time and it grows, especially after St. Constantine the Great, when Christianity becomes legal. Christians are allowed to come above ground, I guess you could say. They're not meeting in catacombs, not meeting in like secret places. And now they can buy buildings. So they adopted the basilica. The basilica is a rectangular building with a pitched wooden roof and a semi-dome in the back, which is what most of our churches are kind of the basic architecture is, except that we've stuck a dome on the top now. The basilica was a public building. It was used for forums, for political speeches, because it had a really, really good space and good acoustics. It was used even for an indoor markets. Like, it was all around kind of like a civic center in the Roman times. So it made sense for the church to adopt this kind of public building and make it into its like kind of like temple worship, because it was the most suitable building to congregate a lot of people and to have, and for what you're doing, which is like, speaking. And so you had kind of like a merging of the basilica and the Temple of Solomon, which had like the three sections, the outer courtyard, the main nave, the main like structure, and then you had the Holy of Holies, and we have the same structure here. We have the narthex, We have the nave where people sit, and we have the holy altar, which is the Holy of Holies, right? We have this three-part section of the basilica, and we adopt this. And now that you have buildings, now you can do more beautiful and elaborate services, processions, things like that. So even at the time of St. John Chrysostom, which is like, in the mid 300s, you still don't have the full liturgy as we have today. I'm sorry that I'm going on and on. I'm trying to kind of whittle it down. So originally, Christians would only fast, like fully fast, like no food, no milk, no water, nothing for 3 days, and then do Pascha, right? The 40 days was originally for catechumens, for those who were studying, preparing themselves for holy illumination, for baptism at Pascha, which was the first kind of the major time in the year where they would baptize adults, right? So that fast, the 40-day fast, was originally for catechumens, not for the already baptized Christians. As time went on, spirituality kind of went down, as we see today. People didn't know enough about their faith, so the church slowly adopted that fast of the catechumens, and it became the mainline fast for everybody to kind of renew our faith and to come back to our roots and to learn, right? Which is a very wise thing to do. So slowly you have kind of like this progression over many, many years of Lent beginning to grow, different traditions in Lent, and then Holy Week, right? And then like, this kind of like marking out of Palm Sunday and then, evening services. So, it grows and grows and grows. Like the version of Holy Week that we have is probably maybe like 500 years old. So in 2,000 years, that's only a quarter of it. And even that has been changed, because if you pay attention in your books, and we've said this before, we're doing like Holy Week half a day backwards, right? So we're doing Matin service, Orthros, like morning services, we're doing them at night, right? Because originally, so my great-grandmother, who passed away now, when she was born, like literally at the turn of the century, 1900, she remembers not doing the resurrection at midnight. She remembers doing it at daybreak, because that's when the resurrection happened, right? The myrrh bearers, they go early in the morning before the sun has risen, right, to the tomb, right? And so Christians would reenact that. They would reenact. So think of it like all the bridegroom services that we think are so beautiful and they're dark and candlelit and stuff, those would have been morning services. They're Orthros, they're Matin service. So on Sunday, Holy Sunday night of Palm Sunday, when we have the first bridegroom service at night, that's technically the Matins for Monday morning. And then on Monday night, we're doing the second bridegroom service, and it's really for Tuesday morning, the Matins. But the thing is that because people were working, and even back then, people were working in the fields, they were farmers, they were in the marketplace, and things like that, they would miss the Orthros services. And the Orthros services are the longer ones. They have all the theology and these beautiful hymns. Not to say that the Vesper services are not beautiful, but the Orthros ones are much longer and bigger and more beautiful. And so people were missing those. They could go to the Vesper services at night, but they were not getting kind of like the real meat of the theology of Holy Week. And so at some point, the church decided to shift Holy Week back so that people are doing, like, for example, Monday's Matins, they're doing it the night before, so people can experience and have, and like to cater to basically our schedule. Now, whether that's a good thing or not is a different story altogether. That's a different discussion. Yeah, do we cater to people, or does, and has it really helped? I would say maybe it has, because more people do follow it. But maybe we should be catering to Christ as opposed to Christ catering to us all the time. But that's so even in the last 100 to 150 years, has there been a shift in the way we do Holy Week again, right? So they're always constant. Like the body of Christ is a living body. It grows, right? It changes, right? Just like our bodies do, according to the needs of the times, the needs of the circumstances, and the environment that we live in. So that's like a short kind of 10-minute answer. It's a lot.
It's a big topic, and you touched on something very interesting as well. You said how really the liturgy and the week that we know how we know it has only really been in place for about 500 years. And so not to launch into a discussion about this, but we've talked in several of these live chats about the fear that people have about COVID and all of these different things, and people saying things like, never in the history of the church has the doors been closed and people haven't been allowed to go in. And I think our ancestors, our Christian ancestors, were far more resilient, and things have happened, and things have changed, the way things operate. It has not been the exact same.
Yes. The more somebody digs deep into the history of the church, you will find that these pandemics have happened and way worse, right? Like COVID is nothing compared to the Black Plague, compared to even like Spanish flu that was like 100 years ago, 1917, that killed 60 million people worldwide. The Black Plague killed more than half the population of the world at the time. Like, think about that. Like, just dead people in the streets, like in the gutter. Like, it's like you couldn't keep up with the death. People would catch it and they would die 24 to 48 hours later. So we're talking about like much worse than what we are experiencing now. And there are historical documents, showing how the church dealt with that. And so, and it was the same back then. Like, the church never believed, for example, that Holy Communion could ever give disease, but it did protect itself from the periphery, all the other periphery things, right? So it's like, it's not the communion that will get you sick, but, the way you're doing it, the way you're congregating, the way you're distributing it, things like that, they were very concerned. Like even Saint Nicodemos of the Holy Mountain, who compiled the Rudder, the Pidalion, which is the book of all the canons of the church, and he was a monk on Mount Athos during Turkish occupation. He speaks about this, about what do you do when you commune people and there's a plague, right? And there's still a lot of plagues at the time, and that you commune the person, and then afterwards, you do your due diligence, and you wash the utensils properly with vinegar and things like that. Not because the communion is going to get you sick, but just the periphery, right? And so that stuff, we hear that stuff and we get like, oh, it's like, that sounds crazy. Like, we thought everything was like, there's a magic bubble around us and we don't live in the world, right? But this is like Saint Nicodemos the Hagiorite, who's very highly respected and highly conservative, and he commented on all the canons of the Pidalion, and he speaks about this, right? So, like, they always took care, right? And this is not the first time the church is closed either. Like in the Black Plague, churches did limit the people congregating because they knew people were going to die, right? And so it's not a matter of faith versus science. It's not that. It's just the martyrs died, and they got diseases, and they got tortured, and they went through trials, and like, God didn't love them. You know what I mean? Like, God didn't spare them. Like the Apostle Paul had the thorn in his flesh, he says, which was some kind of disease that he had, and God never took it from him. He said, my grace is sufficient for you, right? It's like, so God didn't love him. Like, just because God loves us and we love God, and we believe in miracles and we believe in the power of Holy Communion, does not mean that we don't live in the world and that we're not subject to the same decay and death and calamity that everybody else is, right? So we do the best that we can within the world that we're within the parameters that are given to us, right?
All right. Yeah, it kind of connected really well there. So thanks for answering that.
Yeah, lots of questions coming in. I see.
Sorry?
Lots of questions I see coming in now.
Yeah, okay, so we've got one from Nick, and it's a two-parter, so I'll give you both. Nick says, wanting to find out more about the holy light from the tomb in Jerusalem. Does it belong to the Orthodox, and does the holy light only come to the Orthodox priests?
Yes.
And then Alicia wanted to follow that up with, why can we never witness the holy fire light up? If nothing about our faith is a secret, as I was told,